Welcome to the Urban Herald. For years, the story everyone told about Venezuela, it was always about the classic symptoms of socialism, right? Hyperinflation, a collapsed economy, political decay. But what if that collapse wasn't just some ideological accident? What if the crisis you were seeing on the news was actually the successful outcome of a massive criminal enterprise that was just pretending to be a government?
That is exactly the conclusion you have to draw from years of forensic intelligence, from all this analysis that's been happening. And it all came to a head with what we saw in early 2026. So today, as the team here at the Open Herald, we're going to go beyond that surface-level story. We want to expose the hidden face of Nicolás Maduro and the real anatomy of what we're calling the Pranato estatal.
Pranato estatal. Can you break that down for us?
It's this idea that a nation-state was deliberately taken apart and rebuilt into something else, basically into the structure of a giant, highly organized prison gang.
And our sources for this deep dive, we're talking military intelligence reports, testimonies from defectors, the final U.S. indictment. They detail this astonishing end, the capture of Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. And this wasn't, a diplomatic move. It wasn't a coup. It was Operation Absolute Resolve, a full-blown military extraction.
And the target wasn't a president. The target was the head of what the U.S. had legally defined as a narco-terrorist syndicate.
The details sound like something out of a movie.
They really do. I mean, the tactical planning alone tells you everything. You're talking about a huge operation, 150 aircraft, all happening in the pre-dawn hours. And before Delta Force operators even went in, there were cyber operations that just knocked out the entire power grid in Caracas.
And the helicopters, they came in low to avoid detection.
Incredibly low, flying just 100 feet above the Caribbean. I mean, the precision was just off the charts.
And they got him. At Fort Tiuna, he was apparently scrambling to get to a steel safe room.
A final act, really, symbolizing the end of his immunity. And that's the key point our sources make. This wasn't just the day a dictator fell. It was the end of a decade-long project, a project where the entire concept of Venezuelan sovereignty was sold off, piece by piece.
Where human suffering became the actual currency of control.
Exactly. That's how you bought loyalty. So when you ask what happens next, well, the charges he's facing now in a Manhattan federal court are just staggering.
And these aren't just corruption charges.
No. This is narco-terrorism conspiracy, massive cocaine importation, weapons trafficking, money laundering. These charges are the blueprint for understanding how the entire state actually operated.
So our mission today is to pull all this evidence together, the forensic reports, the chilling testimonies, and give you the full, unvarnished picture. We're going to expose this network of drug trafficking, ecocide, and the systemic torture that really defined this regime. This is the hidden architecture of power.
So let's start with the operation itself. Absolute Resolve. The amount of prep work that went into this, it tells you this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was the result of a huge intelligence effort.
Let's get into that timeline. The sources say CIA infiltration of Maduro's inner circle started as early as August 2025. That's, 5 months?
At least 5 months of continuous high-risk surveillance. I mean, they were tracking everything. His travel routes, his movements inside Fort Tiuna, his communication patterns. They even knew his personal habits. It was total visibility.
And the Pentagon built a full-scale replica of his compound for rehearsals.
They did. That's the level of commitment we're talking about. This shows you it was never going to be a simple arrest. This was planned as a precision military strike designed to neutralize the security of a head of state with, as little risk to the operators as possible.
There's also a detail in the reports about a final warning, a phone call from President Trump.
Yes. About a week before the operation, a call was placed. It was essentially one last chance. Surrender yourself, avoid military action. And the sources say Maduro actually came close to agreeing.
What stopped him?
Pressure. From the hardliners in his circle, people like Diosdado Cabello and his wife, Celia Flores, they convinced him to refuse. And that refusal, that locked the mission in.
And then there was a delay.
Right, a 4-day weather delay, which again just highlights how precise this thing had to be. But once they got the green light on the night of January 2nd, the tactical force was just overwhelming.
And the assets for this, they came from all over, right?
All over. Over 20 different bases in the Western Hemisphere. We're talking F-22s, F-35s, electronic warfare planes, all designed to just completely disable Venezuela's Russian-made air defense systems. The cyber op that took out the power grid was the first move, blinding them completely.
And then the breach itself.
The breach at Fort Tiuna. Delta Force went in, and they had rehearsed this exact scenario for months. Maduro and Flores were taken completely by surprise.
And he was running for that safe room.
He was trying to get to that steel-reinforced room, but one account says he was, and I'm quoting here, bum-rushed right so fast that he didn't get into that.
And that final image of him, blindfolded, in a gray Nike sweatsuit on the deck of the USS Iwo Jima, it's definitive.
It is. It really speaks to the suddenness of it all. But we have to talk about the cost. The reports confirm at least 80 Venezuelan lives were lost, mostly his security detail.
And critically, 32 Cuban military and intelligence personnel were also killed.
And that number 32 Cubans, that's a huge confirmation of how deeply integrated foreign security was in his regime. We'll get more into that. But the second Maduro was in U.S. custody, the legal battle began.
Right, the whole head of state immunity argument. His lawyer, Barry Pollock, brought it up immediately, calling it a military abduction. So why isn't the Noriega case a slam dunk for his defense?
That's a great question, and it's really the heart of the prosecution's strategy. So with Manuel Noriega in 1989, the U.S. invaded Panama and captured him. The charges were for drug trafficking. Complicated, but straightforward.
Yeah.
The charges against Maduro are different. It's narcoterrorism. By proving that the state itself, the military, the intelligence services, the president's office, was all basically a machine for moving drugs and partnering with terrorist groups like Hezbollah and the FARC.
You're saying he forfeits his protection.
Exactly. The argument is he wasn't acting as a head of state, he was acting as the CEO of a global criminal syndicate. And that changes everything.
That reframing is central to this whole analysis. So how did the rest of the world react?
It was completely polarized, as you'd expect. On one side, you had celebrations, the Venezuelan diaspora in Miami and Madrid. For them, it was justice. On the other side, immediate condemnation.
Remote.
Brazil, Mexico, other Latin American countries worried about sovereignty, and of course the geopolitical rivals, China and Russia, they all demanded his immediate release.
And what happened inside Venezuela? There was a transition.
A very quick and maybe a very calculated one. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as acting president. Her first speech was pure defiance. She called the operation imperialist terrorism.
But that didn't last.
Not at all. Within days, her tone completely changed. Suddenly, she's talking about establishing respectful relations with the U.S., even inviting collaboration. It suggests the elite fractured almost immediately. Some saw the writing on the wall and started trying to save themselves.
But the threat isn't gone. Diosdado Cabello is still there.
And that is key. Cabello, the number 2, is still a major power player. He went on TV urging resistance, vowing revenge. His power base is deep in the military. So while the leader is gone, the criminal apparatus, the structure of the Pranato, it's still there and it's ready to fight.
To really get what this criminal state was, we have to kind of deconstruct the man who built it. And the intelligence we've reviewed for this, it shows that Maduro's entire public image was built on, well, a fundamental fraud.
It all starts with what we call the birth enigma. This controversy around his nationality, which, if it were ever legally proven, would mean his presidency was illegitimate from the very first day.
And this all hinges on the Venezuelan Constitution, right? Articles 41 and 227.
Exactly. The Constitution is crystal clear. To be president, you must be Venezuelan by birth.
Yeah.
And you cannot have any other nationality. It's a very old, very deep-seated rule to prevent foreign influence.
So what's the evidence against him?
It's compelling. His mother, Teresa de Jesus Moros, was born in Cucuta, Colombia. There's no debate about that. And under Colombian law, if your mother is Colombian, you are automatically granted Colombian citizenship at birth.
So from birth, he had dual nationality, which would have disqualified him.
Immediately. And this isn't just some technicality. This is the original sin of his rule. And the cover-up, well, the alleged cover-up, is just astonishing.
What did they do?
Investigators found what looks like a systematic effort to just erase the paper trail. Reports from journalists who went to the registry offices in Colombia found that the specific notarial book pages for his birth date, they were either torn out, missing, or had been tampered with.
Wow.
It was a deliberate, high-level operation to, Venezuelanize him. And to this day, the Venezuelan government has never, ever produced a verifiable original birth certificate for public inspection. The document they have is kept under armed guard, 2047. That tells you everything you need to know.
So the foundation is a lie. And then they built this fake persona on top of it. The rock star lie.
Right. I mean, Chavez had this powerful, authentic story, right? The poor soldier who rose up, Maduro, had nothing. He was a bureaucrat. So they needed to invent some charisma for him.
And they landed on '80s rock star.
They claimed he was the bassist in a band called Enigma. They even circulated this old video of the band playing.
But it wasn't him.
Not even close. The actual band members came forward and said, no, that's our vocalist, Carlos Carrillo. It was a total fabrication.
What does that tell you, though? That need to invent a backstory like that.
The sources analyze it as a kind of pathology, a desperate need to construct a persona because he had no natural political legitimacy. He wasn't a rock star. He wasn't even the great baseball player he claimed to be. He was a political operative.
So what was his real path to power? Where did he get his training?
His real background is actually far more strategic. He got intensive political training in Cuba at a school for political cadres from 1986 to 1987. That's where he learned the model.
And the bus driver's story is true.
Yes, he worked as a driver for the Caracas Metro. But the key part is that he used that position to found its first union. And there's a quote from him from that time that's incredibly revealing.
What did he say?
He said his goal was to build a class and revolutionary union force and unite it with popular forces for a general insurrection against the system.
So his goal was never democratic. It was always revolution.
Always. Trained and executed under a very strict Cuban model.
And then there's maybe the most bizarre piece of this manufactured identity, his secret religious devotion.
Yes, the Sai Baba connection. Publicly, he's a Marxist and a Christian. But privately, he and Celia Flores were devout followers of the Indian guru Satya Sai Baba.
Which seems like a huge contradiction.
It's a profound spiritual incoherence at the top. They visited his ashram in India back in 2005. And according to reports, a giant portrait of the guru hung in Maduro's private office.
Right alongside Bolivar and Chavez?
Right next to them. The revolutionary, the liberator, and the guru. And the implication, according to the psychological profiles we've seen, is that this faith created this sense of fatalism in him.
How so?
If everything is preordained by some divine force, it gives you an excuse for inaction during a crisis. It also reinforced his dependency on Celia, who introduced him to the faith. It just points to this deeply superstitious, almost incoherent core to his character.
Maduro's rise wasn't just about this fake persona. It was built on, literal piles of cash. Let's look at his role as a corruption operator long before he was president.
The Odebrecht scandal gives us the smoking gun here. For anyone who doesn't know, the Lava Jato investigation in Brazil uncovered this massive bribery scheme. The construction giant Odebrecht paid billions in bribes all over Latin America.
And Maduro was the point man in Venezuela.
He was the key operator for their illegal campaign financing during Chavez's 2012 re-election campaign. And we have direct testimony on this.
From who?
From Monica Mora. She was the campaign strategist they hired. She testified that she would meet Maduro in his office at the foreign ministry.
And he was the foreign minister at the time.
Just sitting foreign minister of a sovereign nation. And he would personally hand her folders stuffed with cash. About $11 million in illegal off-the-books payments. He was the hands-on bagman, even making sure she had a safe escort out of the building with the money.
It's just the audacity of it. The foreign minister personally handing over millions in dirty money.
It proves that corruption wasn't a bug, it was the feature. It's how he built his network. So when Chavez died in 2013, Maduro had a problem. He had no real political capital of his own.
Which leads us to this incredibly cynical move. The little bird story.
Yes, what we've termed weaponizing grief. This was a calculated piece of political theater, a kind of necropolitical manipulation designed to transfer Chavez's quasi-religious authority to him.
He claimed Chavez's spirit visited him as a bird.
As a pajarito chiquitico, a tiny little bird that whistled and gave him its blessing.
And internationally, everyone kind of laughed at this. But inside Venezuela, it worked.
It worked because Chavez had successfully built this cult of personality, the Christ of the poor. By claiming he was the chosen apostle, that he was communicating with the leader's spirit, Maduro managed to win that very narrow, very contested election in 2013.
It essentially made opposing him seem like heresy.
Exactly. Opposition became sacrilege against the revolution's savior, and this kind of magical thinking allowed him to maintain this chilling detachment from the suffering that followed.
And there's a specific example of this, isn't there, from the 2017 protests?
It's one of the most jarring images. In 2017, there were massive protests. People were being killed in the streets by state forces.
And what was Maduro doing?
He posted pictures of himself calmly playing baseball, and then he released a statement saying, "Justice will come for the violent groups."
While his forces were the ones being violent.
The juxtaposition it's just so revealing. The baseball game, the total sense of calm, while the country is literally on fire. It was a signal to everyone that their suffering was meaningless to him. His power was all that mattered. So now we get to the absolute core of the criminal engine. The Cartel of the Suns, or Cartel de los Soles. This is the structure that legally underpins the whole narco-terrorism charge.
Okay, so let's define this clearly. When we say Cartel of the Suns, this isn't like a traditional cartel operating inside a country.
No, that's the fundamental difference. The cartel is the state. The name itself comes from the gold sun insignias that Venezuelan generals wear on their uniforms. It's a symbol that drug trafficking isn't just tolerated by the military, it's managed and operated by the military from the very top.
So it's basically a patronage system.
The ultimate patronage system.
Yeah.
Maduro buys the loyalty of his generals by making them rich. He literally gives them control over drug routes, ports, borders. Their wealth and their freedom depend entirely on him staying in power.
And the scale of this operation is huge.
It's breathtaking. The UN estimates at least 400 tons of cocaine move through Venezuela every year. That's almost a quarter of the entire global circulation.
And the military is involved at every step.
Every single step. The border units on the ground, they decide who gets safe passage. The Air Force radar operators, they create safe flight corridors for the drug planes. The National Guard controls the airports, even using the presidential hangars sometimes. The Navy guarantees shipments get out to sea, heading for the US and Europe. It's a full-service operation.
And the case that really blew this wide open, that linked it right to the top, was the Narcosobrinos case.
Absolutely. The 2015 arrest of Celia Flores' two nephews, they were caught trying to traffic 800 kilograms of cocaine. It just exposed the rot at the absolute heart of the first family.
And the recordings of them during the sting operation were damning. They connected the drug money directly to politics.
They did. They admitted on tape that the $20 million in profit from that one shipment, it was meant to fund Celia Flores' political campaign. And in their own words, to help the family remain in power.
And they were using the presidential airport terminal to do it.
That's maybe the most audacious detail. They boasted about using Terminal 4 or Rampa 4, which is reserved exclusively for the president.
To think they felt so untouchable that they'd use the presidential ramp for cocaine trafficking. What does that say?
It says they had achieved total impunity. Using Rampa 4 meant you bypassed all customs, all security. It was the ultimate proof that the state was just a tool for their criminal enterprise.
And now Celia Flores herself is named as a co-defendant.
Yes. The 2026 indictment alleges she personally took hundreds of thousands in bribes to make sure those cocaine flights had safe passage. So the link is now official and legal.
The regime didn't just use its own military, though. They actively partnered with other armed groups.
Oh, absolutely. They didn't just tolerate the Colombian guerrillas like the FARC and the ELN. They went into business with them. The regime would trade military-grade weapons, we're talking missile launchers, in direct exchange for cocaine.
And Maduro's son was involved in this?
Yes. Testimonies identified his son, Nicolásito, as a direct liaison in these arms for drugs deals.
And then there's the Tren de Aragua, this megaband that started in a prison.
The Tren de Aragua is a perfect example of the Pranato. The state essentially handed over control of a prison to the gang leaders. Then they co-opted the gang, using them as a paramilitary force to control poor neighborhoods and crush dissent.
And in exchange, the gang got protection to expand.
State protection to expand across South America, and now intelligence shows they're operating in at least 20 U.S. states.
Which led to that chilling assassination in Chile, the Ronald Ojeda case.
Lieutenant Ronald Ojeda was a Venezuelan army defector, a critic of the regime. He was kidnapped in Santiago, Chile. His body was found dismembered, buried under concrete. Chilean investigators confirmed it was a political assassination ordered from Venezuela.
And carried out by Tren de Aragua.
Allegedly carried out through their networks. It shows the regime was willing to outsource state-sponsored murder to its criminal partners, even across international borders. So, while the drug money was funding the elite, the regime had another problem: how to control the starving masses. And that brings us to the CLAP scandal, what we call the architecture of famine.
CLAP.
Yes.
This was the government food box program. It was presented as this great humanitarian effort, but it was just a massive fraud.
It was a deeply cynical money laundering scheme that funneled at least $350 million through U.S. banks.
Yeah.
The key figure here was a man named Alex Saab, who was Maduro's top financial fixer. He set up this whole web of shell companies to pull it off.
So how did this scam work exactly? It wasn't just stealing money, right? They were messing with the food itself.
Right. It was a two-part fraud. First, massive overinvoicing. But second, and this is the truly evil part, was quality fraud. Saab's companies would buy the absolute cheapest, lowest grade food products imaginable.
Like the powdered milk.
The powdered milk that lab tests showed had so little protein and so few nutrients it couldn't legally be called milk. They'd buy a box of the stuff for, say, $12 to $20.
Okay.
Then they would sell that exact same box back to the Venezuelan government for $35.
A nearly 200% markup on poison.
Essentially, yes. It's a horrifying model. The state starves its people, then offers them substandard food at an inflated price, and uses that food to demand political loyalty.
It became a weapon.
It absolutely became a tool of social subjugation. One top official even admitted publicly that CLP was a political instrument. There are countless reports of families being told if they didn't vote for the government or if they protested, their CLA box would be cut off. It was coercion through hunger.
So from famine, let's move to the financial collapse. The looting of the state oil company, PDVSA.
Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, but the country fell apart because the regime just bled PDVSA dry. The latest scheme, the PDVSA crypto plot, allegedly vanished somewhere between $17 and $21 billion.
Billion, with a B.
Billion, with a B.
And they use cryptocurrency to do this, to get around sanctions.
Exactly. To avoid the U.S. banking system, PDVSA started settling its oil sales in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and USDT. But that money never made it to the state treasury.
Where did it go?
It was allegedly washed through crypto mixers, services that are designed to obscure the trail of transactions, and then funneled into private accounts and used to buy luxury assets around the world. All while the country was desperate for medicine and food.
And the government even launched its own crypto, the Petro.
Which was a total disaster. It collapsed in 2024. The whole thing was a fraud from the start. Its white paper was plagiarized. The oil backing they promised never existed. It was just another scam.
And the total amount stolen from the country. Their estimates are just wild.
They are. The low end, based on formal investigations in 29 countries, is around $68 billion. The high end, from a former planning minister, is $300 billion.
It's hard to even wrap your head around a number that big.
It is. And at the center of so much of this, the drug trafficking, the financial crimes, is one man, Tarek El-Isami,
Who the U.S. Treasury has designated as a major international narcotics trafficker.
He's the nexus point. He connects the drug trade, the state finances, and international terrorism. Beyond the PDVSA scheme, he's been accused of directly facilitating Hezbollah operations in Latin America.
How?
When he ran the National Passport Agency, he allegedly provided legitimate Venezuelan passports to members of Hezbollah and Hamas. The FBI basically described him as a service provider for these groups, giving them the ability to move freely. It's the final link in the chain. As the oil money started to dry up because of the theft and mismanagement, the regime needed a new source of cash, so they turned to gold, or what we call blood gold.
And this started with a decree in 2016, the Orinoco mining arc.
Right. Maduro signed a decree that designated this huge area 111,843 square kilometers. That's an area larger than the entire country of Portugal. And he opened it up for immediate, completely unregulated mining.
This wasn't just mining. This was sanctioned ecocide.
Mm-hmm.
The environmental destruction was on a scale that's hard to imagine.
The numbers are just staggering. Over 500,000 hectares of forest destroyed since 2000. And the deforestation rate jumped over 100% right after that decree was signed.
It was happening in protected areas.
Deep inside protected areas. Even Canaima National Park, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There are now mining pits just 23 kilometers away from Angel Falls.
And the human cost of this, starting with the mercury poisoning, is just as bad.
It's catastrophic. The miners use mercury to separate the gold, and it's just dumped into the rivers. It's poisoned entire river basins, and it's threatening the water supply for Colombia and Brazil, too. One study of indigenous women living along the Cara River found that 92% of them had mercury levels above the WHO's maximum safe limit.
92%.
It's a guaranteed public health disaster for generations to come.
And the mining zones themselves, they weren't even controlled by the Venezuelan military.
No. Control was basically handed over to criminal gangs, these syndicates, and Colombian guerrillas. And what they've established is, for all intents and purposes, a system of modern-day slavery.
The violence is just extreme.
It's the only rule. Minors are mutilated for the smallest infraction. They'll have their hands cut off or get shot in the kneecaps.
And the Tumarimo massacre really brought this to the world's attention.
It did. In 2016, a mass grave was found with between 17 and 21 bodies. Some had been dismembered with chainsaws, and eyewitnesses said they saw the bodies being moved through the town with a military escort.
So the military was complicit.
They weren't just complicit, they were profiting. They collect protection taxes, paid in gold, from the gangs to let them operate with total brutality.
And this environment leads to the most horrific human trafficking.
Women and girls are sold into sexual slavery for grams of gold. We're
Yeah.
talking 5 to 10 grams, which is maybe $50 or $60. Children as young as 9 are forced to work in the pits. It's a complete dehumanization of people for profit.
And Nicolás Maduro's son, he was running this whole operation.
He was sanctioned by the U.S. for his role. Testimonies say he was the coordinator. He would put his trusted people inside the state mining company, and they would buy the gold sheep from the mines and then sell it overseas through the central bank.
And where did all this blood gold end up?
Mostly Turkey and the UAE, where there's less oversight. About $900 million worth went to Turkey alone. But this is where the geopolitics comes back in. In 2020, about $500 million in gold was flown directly to Tehran.
On a sanctioned Iranian airline.
On Mahan Air, yes. It was a gold for gasoline swap to get around U.S. sanctions. And intelligence reports suggest that the profits from those swaps were used to help fund Hezbollah.
So the blood from the mines in Venezuela ends up funding terror in the Middle East.
It's a direct line. And this brings us to the final and maybe the most important layer of this criminal state: the deliberate, organized cruelty. The machine of terror. This is why the UN fact-finding mission concluded that what was happening in Venezuela constituted crimes against humanity.
And they were clear, this wasn't just a few bad apples. This was coordinated state policy.
Exactly. The UN found that since 2013, over 43,000 people had their basic rights violated. They documented over 1,600 cases of torture. And they concluded it was all highly coordinated pursuant to state policies, and that Maduro and his ministers knew it was happening. They provided the resources for it.
Let's talk about the places where this happened, the dungeons, starting with El Helicoide.
El Helicoide is this iconic spiral building in Caracas. It was supposed to be a futuristic shopping mall, but it became the headquarters for the intelligence service, TABIN, and it's now known as the largest torture center in the Americas.
And the methods used there were just barbaric.
Designed to completely break a person. Electric shocks to the genitals, suffocation with plastic bags, they called it bolsillo waterboarding, mock executions, and systematic sexual violence.
And then there's the other place, underground, La Tumba, the tomb.
La Tumba was designed for a different kind of torture, white torture, psychological torture. It's 5 floors underground, the cells are tiny, just 2 by 3 meters, and it's an assault on the senses.
How so?
The lights are on, bright, 24 hours a day. The air conditioning is freezing cold, and it's completely silent except for the rumble of the subway trains passing by. It's engineered to induce panic attacks, nervous breakdowns, to make a person's mind collapse without leaving a physical mark.
And while that was happening in the dungeons, out on the streets you had the death squads, the FAES.
The Special Action Forces, or FAES. They were created in 2016, and they quickly became the regime's tool for extrajudicial killings. They would target poor neighborhoods, areas with dissent.
And the pattern was always the same?
Terrifyingly consistent. Masked agents in unmarked trucks would raid a house, drag out young men, and execute them at point-blank range. Then they'd plant a gun or drugs on the body to make it look like the person had resisted authority.
And the numbers. I mean, the government's own numbers are staggering.
The government itself reported over 5,200 deaths from resistance to authority in 2018 alone. The UN says the vast majority of those were extrajudicial executions. People called the FAES an extermination group.
The case of Oscar Perez, the rebel officer, showed that they would do this to anyone.
Yes. In that raid, there's video of Perez and his group trying to surrender. But the commanders gave the order to execute everyone. All 7 of them were shot in the head. It was a state execution, plain and simple.
And the individual stories of the victims really bring this home. Captain Acosta Arevalo.
Captain Acosta Arevalo was arrested in 2019. He was tortured for 7 days straight by the military counterintelligence, the DGCIM. He was so badly beaten that when they finally brought him to a judge, he was in a wheelchair, he couldn't speak, his fingernails had been ripped out. He died the next day.
In the case of Fernando Alban, the opposition counselor they claimed committed suicide.
Right. They claimed he jumped out of a 10th floor window. But it turned out the windows were locked. Years later, the Attorney General was finally forced to admit that he didn't commit suicide. He was murdered by 7 officers to cover up the torture he'd been through.
Cover up of a murder.
Exactly. And finally, a social leader, Edmundo Rada. He was found mutilated, a gunshot to the neck, widely believed to be the work of the FAES. It just shows you, no one was safe. Military officers, politicians, community activists, anyone could be a target. It was terror as a system of control. So the big question is, how did Maduro hold on for so long with all the sanctions, all the domestic opposition? And the answer is, he had external support. He essentially mortgaged his country's sovereignty to survive.
And the most important relationship here was with Cuba. Venezuela basically became a vassal state of Havana.
It started with the Oil for Services Agreement back in 2000. Venezuela would send up to 100,000 barrels of oil a day to Cuba for free. And in exchange, Cuba sent over personnel.
But this wasn't just doctors and teachers.
No. This was between 30 and 50,000 Cubans, including, crucially, their G2 intelligence and security operatives. They weren't just advising, they were embedded.
Embedded where?
In all the key command structures, SEBIN, DGCIM, even in the national ID system. And the most damning testimonies from defectors confirm that Cuban officials were present and often supervised the torture sessions in those dungeons we just talked about.
So the 32 Cubans killed in the raid, they were part of that security apparatus.
They were the Praetorian Guard. Their job was to keep Maduro in power.
Then you have the Iran and Hezbollah connection. Tarek El-Aissami basically set up a base of operations for them in the Western Hemisphere.
Margarita Island. U.S. intelligence has identified it as Hezbollah's most important base in the hemisphere. It's a hub for money laundering, recruitment, getting false papers, all facilitated by El-Aissami.
And those direct flights from Iran were the logistical link.
Exactly. Mahan Air, the sanctioned Iranian airline, they were used for the gold for gasoline swaps, a critical economic lifeline. And again, intelligence indicates the proceeds from those swaps directly funded Hezbollah's operations.
So if you put it all together, there's a clear division of labor among his allies.
It's a perfect summary. Cuba provided the internal security shield, the intelligence, the repression model.
And Russia and China provided the bigger strategic lifeline.
Right. Russia provided the military shield. They sold Venezuela over $4 billion in advanced weapons, fighter jets, air defense systems. They even deployed Wagner mercenaries during the 2024 protests to train Maduro's elite units.
And China provided the money.
China was the financial shield. They extended over $100 billion in loans between 2007 and 2016, mostly through these loans for oil deals. It forced Venezuela to ship them hundreds of thousands of barrels a day just to service the debt. China is still their biggest oil buyer. That's the hard currency that kept the whole criminal state afloat.
So what we've really documented today, based on all these intelligence sources, it's not the story of a failed socialist state. It's something else. It's the story of a nation being deliberately dismantled and turned into a criminal enterprise, the Pranato estatal.
And that really is the historical verdict here. This was a regime defined by crime, not ideology. You had criminalized institutions like the Cartel of the Suns. You had the monetization of human suffering with the CLAP boxes and the blood gold from the mining arc. And you had institutionalized sadism in the dungeons and with the death squads.
The legacy is just devastating. 8 million exiles, the largest migration crisis in the history of the hemisphere.
Yep.
Oil production is a fraction of what it was. You have mass graves, poisoned rivers, completely hollowed out country.
The full cost, human and environmental, we may never be able to measure it. But the record is there now. The UN reports, the investigations. It creates this indelible picture. So no matter what happens in the New York trial, the true nature of this regime has been exposed.
And the trial will be focused on getting a conviction. But the bigger challenge, the historical challenge, is something else. Given the sheer scale of the looting, we're talking somewhere between $68 billion and maybe $300 billion. The question isn't just about guilt anymore, it's about recovery.
And that really leaves a final thought for you, our listener, to think about. The fall of this dictator, it sets a precedent for justice. But what comes next? How do international courts, how does the global financial system even begin to trace and seize and return those billions of stolen dollars? How do you make sure that money actually gets back to the people who need it to rebuild the ruins of their country? That is the next and maybe the most difficult chapter in this story.
A powerful question. The fight for justice is now the fight for reconstruction. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the hidden face of Nicolás Maduro here on the Urban Herald. We'll see you next time.